Nobody thought the police would arrive on a quiet Tuesday morning. No one imagined the HOA would actually make that call. And absolutely no one, not the officers, not the neighbors watching from their driveways, not even the HOA president herself, was prepared for what happened when the front door slowly creaked open. What they witnessed changed everything. And once you hear what was inside that house, you'll understand why this story spread like wildfire overnight. Before we go further, I have to ask, where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop your country in the comments below. I read every single one, and it genuinely amazes me how far these stories reach. All right, let's dive in. Earl Hutchins was 74 years old and had lived in the same house on Sycamore Drive for 41 years. He had raised 3 children there, mourned the loss of his wife within those walls, and fully intended to spend the rest of his life in that home. He had a porch swing, a garden that covered most of the front yard, and a dog named Biscuit, who was far too old to do much beyond sleep and look adorable. Earl wasn't loud or difficult. He greeted his neighbors, paid his dues, and mostly kept to himself. By all reasonable standards, Earl Hutchins was the kind of neighbor anyone would be lucky to have. But the Sycamore Drive HOA saw things differently. Though, trouble began, at least according to the HOA, about 8 months before the police ever showed up. That was when Sandra Bellows became HOA president. Sandra was the type of person who treated a recycling bin left out 12 hours too long as an personal offense. She had spreadsheets, laminated rulebooks, and a strict eye for detail. The moment she drove past Earl's house and saw his garden, overgrown, vibrant, bursting with sunflowers, tomato plants, and climbing roses, she decided it was an issue. The first violation notice arrived in Earl's mailbox on a Thursday. Unsanctioned. Landscaping. Vegetation exceeding approved height limits. Earl read it, placed it on the kitchen counter, and went right back to watering his tomatoes. He'd dealt with HOAs before and assumed it would pass. It didn't. Over the next 6 months, Sandra sent 11 more notices. Complaints about the garden. Complaints about Biscuit's doghouse being 4 inches too tall. A complaint about wind chimes. And one that made Earl laugh out loud, about the color of his porch swing cushions, which Sandra claimed didn't match the approved outdoor color palette. Earl's daughter, when he told her over the phone, found it far less amusing. What no one on that street knew yet was this. No one knew what Earl had been doing inside that house for the past 3 years. Not his neighbors, not Sandra, not even his own children, not completely. And that hidden detail is what takes this story somewhere no one expected. In the 7th month, Sandra called an emergency HOA board meeting. She presented her spreadsheets, displayed photos, and listed timestamps. The board voted to escalate, to pursue formal action, and if necessary, involve local authorities over what she now labeled a hazard property. Earl received a certified letter. He signed for it, read it at his kitchen table, and for the first time, he didn't laugh. Instead, he picked up the phone. Not to call a lawyer, but to call his grandson, Marcus. Marcus was 26, sharp-minded, and had just completed a degree in urban planning. "Come stay with me for a few weeks," Earl told him. "I might need a witness." The morning the police arrived, it was cold and gray, the kind of morning that makes everything feel heavier than usual. 2 officers pulled up just after 9 a.m. Sandra was already outside, standing in her driveway with her arms folded, looking like she was enjoying a personal victory. A few neighbors stepped out onto their porches. Biscuit barked once from inside, then went silent. The officers knocked, waited, knocked again. And then the door opened. What they saw made both officers stop mid-sentence. One even stepped back. Because inside Earl's house, every visible surface, walls, tables, corners, was covered from floor to ceiling with an overwhelming collection of documented history. Framed photographs, blueprints, laminated maps, stacks of binders with labeled tabs, handwritten records going back decades. And in the center of the room, at a large folding table, sat Marcus, laptop open, documents spread everywhere, completely unfazed. "Good morning," Earl said calmly. "Come on in. We've been expecting someone." For the past 3 years, Earl had been building a case. Not just against Sandra, though she would be part of it, but against the HOA itself. He had carefully documented everything, every bylaw change, every meeting record, every fee increase, every enforcement action. And what he discovered, what he and Marcus spent weeks organizing into a formal complaint, was remarkable. The HOA had been operating without a valid state registration for over 2 years, making every fine they issued legally unenforceable. Even worse, the approved color palette, Sandra cited in her notices, had never been officially adopted by the board. It existed only in her own documents, never approved by vote. Earl handed the officers a manila folder. Inside was a 30-page report, already filed with the State Attorney General's office, the county clerk, and a housing rights nonprofit that had agreed, just 2 days earlier, to take his case pro bono. One officer looked at the folder, then at Earl, then back again. "Sir," he said slowly, "we were called here over an unsanctioned garden." "I know," Earl replied with a faint smile. "And I'd be happy to show it to you. Best tomatoes on the street." The following weeks moved quickly. The HOA's violations against Earl were completely dismissed. The state launched a formal investigation into the HOA's registration and finances. 2 board members quietly stepped down, and Sandra Bellows, who once filed complaints over wind chimes, found herself served with a cease and desist order. But that wasn't all. When the housing rights organization dug deeper, they discovered Earl wasn't alone. 14 other residents in the neighborhood had paid fines over the past 3 years. Fines that were completely illegitimate under state law. Some had paid hundreds. One family had paid over $2,000. Earl organized a neighborhood, meeting in his garden, surrounded by sunflowers and tomato plants, and calmly explained what each of them was entitled to recover. Biscuit slept through the entire meeting, but Earl smiled more that afternoon than he had in years. The garden is still there. The wind chimes still hang from the porch, and the cushions on the porch swing, still not within any approved color. Palette are the brightest, boldest shade of yellow you could imagine. And somewhere, in a perfectly organized filing cabinet, Earl Hutchins has a folder with your name on it, just in case. So here's what I want to know. Did Earl do the right thing, or did he go too far? And what would you have done in his place? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to share where you're watching from. I'll be reading every single one.